Travel chaos across Europe, thousands of flights cancelled, mountains of lost luggage and soaring prices. But what is causing all this? Can it be solved? And what does it mean for the travel industry? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. Overcrowded airports, cancelled flights, expensive tickets. Welcome to the summer holiday season in the Northern Hemisphere. Airlines have been forced to cancel thousands of flights due to strike action, staff shortages and weather. Queues of passengers snaking through some European airports are a familiar sight. Some airlines are advising people to turn up for check-in 4 to 5 hours early. Passenger volumes are at almost pre-pandemic levels, but staffing isn't. Airlines and airports are struggling to rehire people they laid off during the height of the pandemic, leaving workers in a strong position to bargain for better pay and working conditions. So, some airports have told airlines to cut the number of seats they're selling. There have been delays from the Americas to Australia, but it's passengers travelling to and from major European airports who are enduring the worst of the chaos. Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam is one of the airports hardest hit. More than half its flights have been delayed and hundreds cancelled in July so far. London's Heathrow Airport has decided to cap the number of departing passengers to 100,000 a day to try to minimise delays. Airport workers are also striking in the German cities of Hamburg and Frankfurt. The German government is fast-tracking visas for workers from Turkey to bridge the gap. Travel delays caused by strikes are also hitting Spain, France, Belgium, Denmark, Norway and Sweden. We spoke with Willie Walsh, the Director General of the International Air Transport Association. He says it's the managers of the airports, not the airlines, who are to blame.
It's a huge disappointment to the industry that airports are restricting the amount of flights that can be operated or the number of passengers that can travel through the airport. It's really disappointing because airlines want to maximise the benefit of this recovery, given the financial damage that has been done during the last 2 years. But I think from a consumer point of view, it's very important that we can give certainty to customers that their flights will be operating. And I think these measures, while deeply regrettable, will be able to provide that certainty.
Let's bring in our guests. In London is David Learmount. He's an aviation analyst and consulting editor for Flightglobal. In Portland in the United States is Susan Seubert. She's a National Geographic travel photographer. She travels extensively for the National Geographic Expedition Programme. And joining us from the Farnborough Air Show in the UK is Alex Macheras, an aviation consultant and author of Aviation Briefing. Welcome to you all. David, I'll start with you. Easy question. Whose fault is all this? Why are we queuing forever and having our flights cancelled at the last minute?
I think you could say the fault is with COVID firmly itself and what COVID did to the industry. The industry lost billions of dollars over that period. It was a long period. Never has there been such an extended shutdown of this industry. In fact, I'm not sure about any other industry. Now, during that time, a whole load of changes happened. They had to either furlough or even lay off lots of employees. And the big problem is that when they tried to take them back on again, when demand ramped up and the airlines started trying to supply it, a lot of people decided they didn't want to come back.
Alex, airlines blame the airports. Airports are blaming the airlines for putting on too many seats. Who's to blame?
It's definitely a blame game. That's the consensus. And of course, everything does lead back to COVID if you follow the trail. But also it's the decisions that were made in the pandemic that really are key in knowing how different aviation markets ultimately ended up 2.5 years later, and in what state airlines were in also 2.5 years later. And I say that because while the same storm has ultimately taken hold of the entire aviation sector, not every airport, airline and third-party company were in the same boat. Many have been able to kind of withstand the storm with better financing, with fewer redundancies, leaving them in a better fit state now that air travel recovery is well underway. Others not so lucky, such as the UK, whose aviation market suffered the worst of all of Europe. And of course, that had an impact on the redundancies that then followed.
Susan, you've probably spent most of your life in queues at airports. How has post-pandemic travel panned out for you, a frequent traveller?
I've really been trying to play it a little bit like a poker game, really, because there's so much uncertainty. There's a lot of conflicting news reports. So I was always booking my flights well in advance. I always made sure to have plenty of time in between my connecting flights. I tried to make my flights as long haul as possible, because here in the US, the pattern that seemed to emerge as the airlines started to function once more were that the shorter haul flights were the ones that were being most frequently canceled. So it was sort of a strategic move to try to be able to get to some place on time, which is a job requirement of mine. I did have my luggage lost for the first time ever, and that was unfortunate. But given all things considered, I feel very fortunate to have been able to use my experience in order to get from point A to point B without very much hassle.
Did you get your bags back in the end?
I actually did, yes. Finally, they just spent 8 days in Charles de Gaulle Airport.
All right, well, they'll speak fluent French then. David, Heathrow's decision to cap passengers at 10,000 a day, very controversial and has been pushed back Emirates, although Emirates has now agreed to deal with Heathrow. Other airports have tried similar. Is that a pattern you're going to see other airlines also trying to adopt?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting little confrontation. Heathrow made its announcement and said, look, this is what, with the resources we have, the people we have, this is what we can actually supply. So please don't ask for more than that, and plan your flights and your passenger loads according to what we can actually deliver you. Emirates was the first to shout, that this was far too painful, and they really didn't want to do it. And then Etihad wasn't very far behind, but shortly they obviously sat down around a desk. I didn't see this happening, but because about 24 hours later, a truce was observed, and the airlines had come to the conclusion that there was no point in demanding more than Heathrow was honestly able to supply.
And Alex, Frankfurt also wants to reduce the flights coming in and out, and Lufthansa has agreed with that. Apparently, Schiphol has a similar limit on passenger numbers. Will we see other airports doing the same, other busy airports?
We will, because we haven't yet hit that real peak of the summer season. And that is when really the students and the pupils kind of break up for that extended summer break. And that's going to have a surge in demand meet what is a sector that is incredibly short of staff. And that's when that disruption occurs. That's when the queues are formed. That's when we see all of this footage from around the world, but mostly in Europe, with ultimately passengers facing immense disruption as travel rebounds. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. Things will smoothen out from mid-September onwards, but it really is just the state of the air travel sector right now, and all roads lead to staffing levels.
Alex, so does that mean the end of this summer ritual for some of looking for those last-minute flight bargains? Is that something you're not going to be able to do this year?
Well, there are still deals to be found, of course, especially with budget carriers and short haul. But if we're talking in a more kind of long-term visionary way, we know that the cost of air travel is going to increase, not least because of the impacts of the oil price, the impacts and uncertainties over the war in Ukraine and so on. So there are all other factors that aviation is inherently exposed to. Because if you think back before the pandemic, we had periods of air travel disruption, and none of it was pandemic related, and not very much of it either was staffing levels related. So, air travel faces this daily challenge from so many different external factors. But as I say, the expectation is that things will smoothen out over the Northern Hemisphere autumn and winter. But of course, there are other fears, such as a looming recession and the uncertainties, as I said, over Ukraine. So only time will tell.
David, how much are oil prices particularly affecting the price of our tickets? I know some airlines have hedged on oil prices, but what effect is that having?
Well, oil prices are having a big effect. They always do on airline fares. But the other thing which is definitely going to have an effect is when the airlines and the airports are hiring or rehiring staff that they laid off before or trying to tempt new ones. An awful lot of the jobs will have to be better paid than they were before. I mean, it's very easy to write off baggage handlers as being sort of humble creatures at the bottom end of the food chain, but they are incredibly important. And if they reckoned, having time to think about it over the COVID pandemic, that they really didn't have a job that was worth going into, a lot of them decided they'd do something else which was better paid. So it's not just fuel prices. The airlines are going to have to pay more for people, especially those in humble jobs, which nowadays, the prices being what they are, includes cabin crew.
And we'll come back to that staffing issue in a second. But Susan, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the cost of flying, which must factor into your budgets for your trips, what sort of impact is it having on you? Have you really noticed a change in the cost of travel?
I have noticed a change. However, it hasn't been as substantial as I was sort of reckoning that it would be. I've always had to, I mean, it's just a company policy that we fly economy. And so part of the game that I play with the airlines is trying to figure out ways to maybe spend just a couple of extra $100. And again, because I can have that discretionary decision. I might get one sort of tiny bump up in class and therefore be able to carry on an extra bag or be able to choose my seat. And that, again, will make me able to get on that flight if it happens to be overbooked because I haven't bought the very bargain fare. But yes, there has definitely been a price increase, and it was very pronounced on my last flight back from France to Portland. I had to go to France twice during the month of June. The first ticket was about $1,000 less expensive than the second ticket, even though they were identical routes. So,
Alex, for travellers like Susan, for all travellers, are the airlines now the ones that are holding the power? Are the consumers are the ones that are having to pay more for their tickets, whereas once upon a time there was a lot more competition pre-pandemic?
Well, there is still competition out there. One of the most remarkable things of the pandemic and of this immediate aftermath is that actually we didn't really lose many airlines, not nearly as many as that were initially predicted when COVID was first about, and that is because of the government relief packages and the financial state aid that went into supporting these carriers. So competition is still definitely there, but that price increase is probably more likely to do with the gradual moving into the summer peak. And that's where we see those kind of key differences. And of course, as I said, kind of longer term, we know that the cost of air travel will increase. That's happening in parallel to a cost of living crisis, to a fluctuating but mostly high oil price, and so on.
And Alex, David touched before on the issues of staffing at airports. Schiphol, one of the world's busiest, 58,000 staff at the moment, 10,000 less than before the pandemic. Where have they gone? How long does it take to recruit them back? And particularly security staff, how long do they take to get trained and through the system so people understand the process?
Well, I wrote a column about this in late January. Kind of after speaking to several airlines and airports, it became very apparent to many in the industry that the staffing levels were not anywhere near adequate to deliver what was the summer 2022 schedule that most airlines were selling. Now, what we've seen all this disruption as airlines attempted to deliver a schedule that was far too ambitious, that was mostly in line with 2019, without anything even kind of adequate in terms of staffing level. And the industry has to really face this now head on, which it is now. but it's simply too late. You know, we're in the summer season now in the Northern Hemisphere, and that's causing a problem. These staffing levels we need to have people either return to aviation, many have left, but also we need to make ultimately many of these jobs better paid, because there are so many people that you speak to that realize after being made redundant that actually they can earn more in a supermarket, but the difference is they don't start at 2:30 in the morning. They don't have disgruntled passengers to deal with when the airline has a technical fault and so on. And so, you know, this is a conversation, a hard conversation that the industry has to have with itself in order to make it more attractive to bring those workers back into the sector. This, of course, has been complicated by factors such as Brexit, of course, because we've lost so many EU nationals here in the UK who departed in the pandemic, many of them, a significant majority, working in the aviation sector.
David, you touched on this before. Are airlines waking up to this fact that their staff, that they need to pay their staff more? There's the Brexit effect in the UK, which has compounded the issue, of course, there. But across Europe, there's a staffing crisis.
Indeed, there is a staffing crisis, and in the not a low-skilled or semi-skilled, which is, you know, a lot of what airlines need. You know, security, at least the ordinary security workers. Cabin crew, it's a skilled job actually, but you know, they're rated at semi-skilled. But these people are desperately needed. You cannot get them overnight. And getting baggage handlers, they may not need huge skills there, but they do need security clearance because they work airside. And so if you want to get somebody back who hasn't been security cleared, it can take months to actually get the clearance through, because so many people are applying that the agencies, the government agencies that check security clearances simply can't cope with the demand.
And Susan, COVID-19 hasn't gone away. We all wish it had, but it's still lurking there. When you're travelling internationally, what are you still finding you have to do to make sure you've got everything you need before you're allowed on a plane? Because many countries still have restrictions.
I always try to stay as safe as possible. My goal is to not get sick. And right now, I know more people who have gotten ill with COVID than at any other point during this entire pandemic. I think that's the result of a combination of the relaxed masking rules. I was in France the day that the United States dropped the requirement for a 24-hour negative test prior to flying back to the States from, you know, international locations. And so there's a direct correlation between dropping the mask mandates and the testing requirements and the jump up in the number of COVID cases, but also the fact that it is mutating so quickly. I mean, it's being allowed to kind of go unchecked, and we can't keep up with the vaccinations because of the mutation. So it's a very complicated situation. And I just wear a hospital grade N95 mask at all times, and that's, you know, and try to stay as far away. Every single flight I have been on the last 2 months has been absolutely packed for obvious reasons. But I, knock on wood, have not contracted it. I test regularly, and
doesn't sound
and
like
so far
much,
I've managed to avoid it.
Doesn't sound like there's much glamour left in travel at the moment. Alex, a lot of those people leaving Europe are heading to further afield, heading to the developing world, often North Africa, the subcontinent of Africa, Asia. Those are places dependent on tourism. How are they being affected by these delays in Europe? Is it putting people off going?
Not really, no. We are seeing now, thankfully, the reopening of those really restricted markets, those markets that were closed for most of the pandemic in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, across the subcontinent, and so on. And of course, for those countries that are reliant on tourism, that's good news for them. There is immense pent-up demand. 1 in 3 UK households, for example, who would ordinarily travel, have vouchers that are valid for this summer that you can be sure they are definitely using. But I just want to go back to that previous point you were making with Susan, which is that actually we still have to keep having this conversation about COVID, because COVID is still causing havoc, not just with the public, but also with the staffing levels that are the staff that are able to show up in the first place. We have so many airlines declaring an unusually high rate of staff absences, all citing COVID, that actually it's another conversation that the aviation sector is not having with the governments across the world, but probably would be more sensible to, which is that it is in everyone's interest to keep transmission of this thing low, because we see the moment there is an uptick, be it of Omicron, be it of these new subvariants and so on, that immediately translates into staff absences, which in turn causes chaos for the staff that were able to turn up in the first place.
And David, sticking with that theme, after the summer rush is over, do you think demand for flights will hold up? I mean, we've just talked about coronavirus, we've got war in Ukraine, high energy prices. Are airlines hopeful that they'll keep up demand after the holidays, September onwards?
Well, all the signs are that demand is keeping up, which is the problem. The airlines can't supply what's required. Europe, which has had a particular problem, is still that the airlines are only able to supply, or the combination of the airlines and the airports are only able to supply at the moment 85% of pre-pandemic demand, and yet the signs are that the demand is going to be more than pre-pandemic. And I really don't see a reduction coming below the seasonal reductions that you normally get. I don't see a particular problem with, let's say, Northern Hemisphere winter. I think that the demand will hold up, and the airlines will still, I think until maybe summer next year, they'll still have varying degrees of problem with meeting the demand. So the airlines do have the whip hand, and I don't think that the cheap bargains are going to be around very much for you.
Alex, could it get worse before it gets better?
I think in this initial immediate period now, we're talking kind of late July, I think the message is to expect even more disruption as that travel surge will surge, as demand really does increase, as I say, in line with kind of the term time breaks. But with everything scheduled to smoothen out from mid-September onwards, and this is reflected in Heathrow's statement, for example, they've got that cap of 100,000 a day, but that's only valid until around September 12th. I think it shows that most of the sector is on the same page there.
OK, well, we're running out of time, but before we go, you're all frequent travellers. So for people heading to the airports this summer, Susan, I'll start with you if I can. Just a tip on how to manage airports at the moment, manage your travel best. What do you do?
I would simply try to find tickets that have maybe a little bit more perks to them rather than risking saving a couple of $100s, because if you get delayed by any length of time, it could have an incredible domino effect on your entire trip. And also, just to keep insurance in mind, it really came to my rescue a couple of times to buy a policy, and they really aren't that expensive, particularly if you get trip interruption insurance.
Okay. And David, what about you?
That would be my tip.
I'd go with Susan about don't go for the cheapest. You can go for the cheapest that gives you the right to cancel your ticket. So they do add, sort of 20 to 30% on, but it may well be worth it. And it's very much easier to negotiate with the airline afterwards if you are on one of the flights that gets cancelled.
All right. And Alex, last bit of advice from you as a frequent traveller.
Sure. If you're checking in luggage, pop an Apple AirTag or another brand similar in order to be able to see your luggage in real time so that you can track it. That helps because bags are being lost all over the place. Carry hand luggage if you can without checking in, and don't arrive to the airport too early. This message being pushed about arrive to the airport really early, often that doesn't achieve much. 2-3 hours is usually enough because those desks are often not even open.
Brilliant. Thanks to all our guests for that excellent advice. Thanks to David Learmount, to Susan Seubert and to Alex Macheras. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. And for more debate, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are @AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.